so hopefully you've caught up and finished your list and tables assignments. If not, you need to go back and do those before you start this. The lists and tables are very important, as some of their code language and their syntax is used in this category. So this is going to be our form. So whenever you complete a form, like you sign in with a username and password, or type in your email address and a password and hit log in or something like that, those are examples of forms. You've also used forms in this class and other classes as well, such as Google Forms, and this is all coded very similarly. So here's some of the things that you'll be able to do. You'll create a form to collect data from a user. You'll code different types of input, such as like multiple choice, radial button, and some other things. Code to submit valid data, which means it checks it to see if it's like right or wrong, or if it matches. And then at the end, you'll be able to create your own form, and it should only take you 45 minutes, so a class period or so. All right. So I'm going to skim through some of this, because a lot of it on the what they call back end is JavaScript, if you look right here, or different coding languages to like compile and gather that data. But on the front end, we can code what the table actually looks like, and the like answer choices and things like that. All right. So after submitting data, HTML can format the data for processing, so like a name and a value. So like what the form option is, if it's like your username, that's the name of that section, and then the value is whatever is typed into that section. Target whether info is presented in a new or the same window, and whether it is sent as get or post, and then call the action. Again, a lot of this is going to be back end stuff, and that's going to be handled by different languages, and that's not even going to be this class. So we're just worried about the front end and formatting this table in this form. Okay. A little bit about encoding. So especially if you look up here in my URL, there's a bunch of different symbols and letters and numbers, things like that. That is encoding. Basically, it's a way that your website sends data to a server, and it encodes it. Basically, it's like substituting things. So if there was an apostrophe in your search term, like in the where was it? Like the apostrophe there between the D and the S, that is actually encoded or converted to a %27 for the server. All right, and that's just another, not really a language, but it's how characters are translated. So it basically does it so that the server doesn't, have an error or an issue, because some things might be unsafe, that it might misinterpret as different symbols and characters. So I'm not really worried about that, just a little bit of information. Script stuff is going to be JavaScript, so we're not going to worry about it too much, but if your web browser or your HTML web page is not able to run JavaScript or scripts, it may display this message. So the current browser does not support scripts, or scripts have been disabled. So obviously we shouldn't have to deal with that, but just in the future, if you ever run across that, that's why. So the form element is created inside the body section of your web page, because it's on our web page, so we want it to be seen, so it has to be in the body section, not the head. The form element requires an action attribute, because you're going to be interacting with it. And the value of the action attribute is the web address of the page that will receive the information that the user inputs and submits. So while building your site, you can use a hashtag instead of the URL, as the hashtag will refer back to the current page. So most form elements also have two other attributes, method and ID. There are two possible values for method, get and post, which value you use determines how the input data is submitted. All right, so a get value sends the input data appended to the URL called in the action attribute. You may have noticed that this is when you input a search term. The get method is useful when the input data is short and or user is simply retrieving, not changing data in a database. So if you're trying to log in, you're not trying to change your password or your username. It's just kind of retrieving data. It's saying, yes, that is your username. Yes, that is your password. Get is the default value for the method. So you may not even have to identify a get value. The post value sends the input data in the body of the message sent to the server. The post method is therefore more secure and is used for information that will create, update, or delete data in a database. So when you're creating a new user account or changing your password or saying, oh, I want to delete my account, you're using a post value send. Okay, so here's an example, form action, and then the website it goes to, and it's going to post. So it's going to create, update, or delete. Okay, so get form data visible in URL, limited to ASCII. URL can be bookmarked for convenience. Post form data concealed in a request body, so it's a little more private. Data, images, files are okay, and URL does not reveal what was submitted through form. All right. So a form can include a number of input elements. Okay, so we have our our tag, element tag input. Each input element has a type, and there are many different values for input types, as well as two other commonly used elements for gathering data from your user: the text area and the select. Okay, so there's a lot coming in. So we have an input section for our elements. And each of these is going to have a text area where we type some information, and then a select area. Some of the most commonly used ways to collect user data are listed and introduced here. All right, so for input, that may be unique to that user. So text or a text area, search, password, email, date, URL. For input, where the user is choosing from a defined list, we have like a radio, checkbox, or select, like a drop down. For uploading a file or a multimedia input, obviously you would just have a file as your select type. And for a user to submit input, they would submit. You hit submit and it sends all your data. Okay. Which type value or element you use depends on what type of information you're asking your user to share and submit. All right. Each input element also has a name and may have an ID. So if it has an ID, that basically means that we can target it later and do CSS styling to it, or maybe change its choices or anything like that. And the value for these should be unique to the input. The name value is sent along the input to the server and identifies the input sent. For example, the name value may indicate that the data is a username or an email address. The ID attribute serves as a unique identifier for each individual element on a web page. Being able to identify each instance of an element differently allows you to style them differently. So if I have an ID that says username, then I know to look for a specific way things may be typed or submitted. If it's an email address, I know it has to have like the @.com or whatever. While the name and ID attributes act as internal identifiers, you can make your own form easier to read and fill out by adding labels for the different input boxes and areas of your form. Basically like using comments, but this will actually be coded, not hidden. Use a label opening and closing tags around input types before text area and select elements. So that was a lot, but we will practice doing all of that. Okay. All right, so we're going to practice our text. So we need to make sure we open up Visual Studio Code, start a new file, and then we will update this in our Google Drive by the end of it, so we have it saved. So we're going to name this Forms, and we're going to save it as an HTML file. Let me open up Visual Studio Code, new file, save as. I'm going to title it Forms. It's going to be HTML. It should be one of the first things we do each time. I'm going to come over here to my template, copy my template data, paste it over here, and then I'm just going to hit save just to update. Okay. We're going to title it Forms, and then let's go back. Alright, so use the type value text when you want the user to input a short text, for example, a username. Okay, so let's take a look at this. I am just going to type exactly what is there. So we're separating it out with our label tags, name, input type equals text, name equals name, and we're going to close it. Alright. The code will display in the browser like this. So to double check that, I save, update my file, then I open this, okay, Edge or Chrome, click OK, and there it is, name, and then a text box that can be typed in. Okay, now I can't submit anything because I don't have a submit button, but that is where that is. Alright, so if you want to go and test that out, feel free to. Alright, so now, so we don't have any back-end data work yet. That's why we can't hit enter and it actually do anything. So text area. So use the element text area when you want the user to input longer text, for example, a comment. Note that this element has both an opening and closing tag, that the label element opens and closes before the text area element rather than enclosing it, so around it. The label includes the for attribute to indicate what input it is related to. Alright, so we are going to make a new section right here. Alright, so we're starting the new code. Label for comments. Okay, comments, questions, and recipes. Thanks for sharing. Now notice that this might seem like it's just like you're just typing there and there's not actually like element tags and oh my gosh, is this actually going to show up? Yes, okay, because it's inside of these tags, so a web browser knows to separate all this out and use it correctly. Alright, see, text area name equals comments. Okay, and if you remember from our tables, this might look a little familiar. And then our ID is going to be equal to comments. And then we're going to close that text area. Okay, so we're identifying it as name comments. Okay, so we're labeling 4 comments, name, this area is connected together. And we're going to have 4 rows, 1, 2, 3, 4, with 55 columns. It's basically how tall and how wide it is. All of this can be adjusted in CSS later, but for right now we're just going to manually create it, and then we've set an ID for comments so we can target these things a little bit easier later. So go ahead, file, save, open it again. Okay, and you should be able to see it. Now obviously there's I probably should put a line break here.